8 legions, 40,000 men, moving in perfect synchrony across mountains, rivers, and forests without a single radio, satellite, or map application. No GPS, no fuel, no engines. Yet they arrived. On time, combat ready, supplied. The question isn't how Rome won its wars. The question is, how did Rome even get there? Before the first sword was drawn, before the first battle cry echoed across a foreign valley, something extraordinary had already happened. Rome had moved an entire army across a continent, fed, armed, and operational, using a system so precise it would impress modern military logisticians. This is not a story about combat. This is a story about the invisible machine underneath the machine. If that kind of hidden history pulls you in, subscribe now, drop a comment below, and tell us, which empire's logistics do you want us to expose next? Forget the soldiers for a moment. A single Roman legion, roughly 5,000 fighting men, required approximately 80 tons of supplies every single month just to remain functional. Grain, salt, leather, iron, timber, vinegar, medical herbs, replacement sandals, rope, animal fodder. The list was relentless. Now multiply that by 8 legions. You're looking at 640 tons of material every 30 days, moving across terrain that had no paved highways outside Roman-controlled territory. This is where the story gets interesting. Most people picture Roman armies as self-contained war machines, disciplined columns of armored men marching toward glory. What they rarely picture is the tale behind that column. For every 5 soldiers, there was at least one support worker. Muleteers, blacksmiths, surgeons, surveyors, bakers, slaves carrying tools, merchants trailing the army's edge, selling what the supply chain couldn't cover. That tail stretched for kilometers. A marching legion with its full baggage train could occupy 12 to 15 kilometers of road. Moving 8 legions in sequence meant an unbroken column of human and animal movement that would take an entire day to pass a single point. But there was a problem. Roads could only carry so much weight before they became impassable. River crossings could only handle so many animals before the banks collapsed into mud. And the deeper into unconquered territory a legion pushed, the longer and more vulnerable that supply tail became. Rome knew this, and Rome had already built a solution before the army ever left its base. Here is something your history teacher likely never mentioned. Roman roads were not built for trade. They were not built for commerce. They were not built for the movement of citizens between cities. Roman roads were built, first and foremost, so that armies could move at maximum speed with minimum attrition. Every engineering decision embedded in those roads reflects a military calculation. The standard Roman road width, approximately 4 to 6 meters, was not accidental. It was the precise measurement needed for 2 fully equipped soldiers to march side by side, while allowing a supply cart to pass in the opposite direction without breaking formation. Few people know this. Beneath the surface of a Roman road lay 4 distinct layers. A foundation of large stones set deep into the earth. A second layer of smaller rubble compacted under enormous pressure. A third layer of gravel and cement. And finally, the surface. Large flat stones fitted together so tightly that a blade could not pass between them. That entire structure could support the repeated passage of heavily loaded military wagons without significant degradation for decades. But the engineering didn't stop at the surface. Roman roads were deliberately crowned, raised at the center, so that rainwater drained immediately to the sides into parallel ditches. A muddy road stops an army. A dry road keeps it moving. That crown was the difference between a campaign succeeding and an army dissolving into logistical chaos before ever reaching its enemy. What happened next was surprising. Rome didn't wait for conquest to build roads. Engineers moved ahead of the legions, surveying, clearing, and laying foundational stone into territories Rome intended to control. The road arrived before the army, which meant that when the army marched, it marched on infrastructure already engineered for its weight, its speed, and its survival. Moving an army is one problem. Knowing where that army is, at all times, across thousands of kilometers, is an entirely different one. Rome solved it with something deceptively simple. Every Roman road was embedded with a parallel communication system so efficient that a message could travel from the eastern frontier of the empire to Rome itself in roughly 3 days. Not weeks, not months, 3 days, across terrain that would take an ordinary traveler 3 weeks to cross on foot. The secret was hidden in something seemingly ordinary. Relay stations. The Romans called them mansiones, rest houses positioned at precise intervals along every major road in the empire. Not randomly, not opportunistically. At exactly the distance a horse could sustain a full gallop before exhaustion began degrading its speed. Roughly 30 to 40 kilometers apart. Each station maintained fresh horses, water, food, and a rotating staff of imperial couriers available at any hour. A courier arriving at Amancio didn't slow down. He transferred the message, or transferred himself to a fresh horse, and continued without interruption. The message moved like a relay baton through a chain of human and animal energy that never needed to stop and rest simultaneously. But there was a problem. This system, known as the Cursus Publicus, was not available to everyone. Access was controlled by imperial passes called diplomata, issued exclusively by the emperor or his senior administrators. Without a diploma, no one entered Amancio and commandeered a fresh horse. The communication network was physically open, but administratively locked. Rome had essentially built the ancient world's first classified information highway. The real innovation wasn't in warfare. It was in the architecture of control beneath the warfare. Generals in the field sent encrypted situation reports back to Rome. Rome sent updated orders forward. Governors received intelligence about troop movements in adjacent provinces. Supply officers were warned about shortages before those shortages became crises. The Cursus Publicus didn't just carry messages. It carried the nervous system of an empire, transmitting signals that kept 40 legions coordinated across 3 continents simultaneously. No system built by human hands operates without fracture points. Rome's logistical network was extraordinary, but it was also fragile in ways that imperial propaganda deliberately concealed from the population, and later from history itself. The first vulnerability was corruption. The Cursus Publicus ran on imperial funding, meaning it ran on tax revenue collected across provinces governed by men whose personal financial interests frequently conflicted with their administrative obligations. Supply officers falsified grain counts. Quartermaster records were manipulated to divert military provisions into private markets. Contractors building road relay stations submitted invoices for construction that never happened. The empire had inspectors, curiosi, specifically tasked with investigating logistical fraud. The fact that curiosi existed in large numbers tells you precisely how widespread the corruption was. But there was a deeper problem. Roman supply chains operated on a principle of calculated proximity, meaning that legions were positioned near enough to supply depots that provisioning remained predictable. When military campaigns pushed legions beyond that calculated radius, the entire supply architecture stretched toward its breaking point. During the Dacian campaigns, Trajan's legions operated so far beyond established supply lines that Rome was forced to construct an entirely new logistical network from scratch, including the famous bridge across the Danube, simply to keep the army fed during winter months. What happened next was surprising. Enemy commanders understood Rome's logistical dependency with remarkable sophistication, Germanic tribes opposing Roman expansion didn't primarily seek pitched battles against legions. They targeted the supply tail, raid the baggage train, burn the grain wagons, collapse a river crossing, isolate the legion from its mansions. A Roman legion cut from its supply network for more than 3 weeks began experiencing discipline failures, desertion, and combat ineffectiveness long before starvation became lethal. The most dangerous crisis, however, came from within. During periods of civil war, and Rome experienced devastating cycles of internal conflict, competing generals deliberately sabotaged each other's logistical networks. Road stations were destroyed, supply depots were burned, provincial administrators withheld provisions from legions loyal to rival claimants. The same infrastructure that made Roman military movement possible became a strategic weapon wielded by Romans against Romans. Every fracture in the political system sent immediate shockwaves through the logistical system, because in Rome, the two were never truly separate. Rome fell, but its logistical architecture refused to disappear. When the last Western emperor was deposed in 476 AD, the roads remained. The relay station foundations remained. The surveying methodologies remained. The administrative frameworks for moving large quantities of material across vast distances remained, embedded so deeply into European infrastructure that medieval kingdoms unconsciously inherited Roman solutions to Roman problems they didn't even know Rome had already solved. This is where the story gets genuinely remarkable. Charlemagne's imperial messengers in the 9th century rode routes whose alignments followed Roman road surveys conducted 800 years earlier. The medieval European postal systems that emerged across France, Germany, and England borrowed structural concepts directly from the cursus publicus: relay stations, standardized distances, administrative passes controlling access. They didn't copy Rome deliberately. They rediscovered the same answers because the underlying problems of moving information across large territories never fundamentally changed. Few people know this next part. Modern military logistics doctrine, the science of moving armies, supplying forward operating bases, maintaining communication lines under combat conditions, traces its formal intellectual lineage directly to Roman operational manuals. The concept of a line of communication, the protected corridor connecting a fighting force to its supply base, is a Roman concept described in Roman texts, refined by Roman engineers, and stress-tested across Roman campaigns spanning 5 centuries. NATO planners study it. American military logistics officers study it. The Roman solutions are that durable. But the deepest legacy isn't military at all. Every modern supply chain, every distribution network moving goods from manufacturer to consumer across continental distances, operates on principles Rome embedded into Western organizational thinking 2,000 years ago. Standardized routes, waypoint infrastructure, predictable transit times, load capacity calculations, risk assessment for supply disruption. These aren't modern business innovations. They are Roman engineering translated into commercial language and applied to different cargo. The secret was hiding in plain sight the entire time. Rome didn't conquer Europe with swords. Rome conquered Europe, and then held Europe, administered Europe, and shaped Europe's organizational DNA for 2 millennia, with roads, relay stations, supply depots, quartermaster records, and a communication network that moved information faster than any rival civilization could respond to it. The soldiers were the visible edge of something vast and invisible underneath, and that invisible machine is still running, in different materials, under different names. Every single time a delivery truck follows an optimized route, every time a military convoy moves along a pre-surveyed corridor, every time a government communicates urgent information across a continent in hours rather than weeks. You were taught that Rome was built by generals, by emperors, by soldiers willing to die on foreign soil. That version of history is not wrong, but it is dangerously incomplete. The real architects of Roman power were surveyors measuring road gradients at dawn, quartermasters calculating grain tonnage in candlelit depots, and courier riders transferring dispatches onto fresh horses in the middle of the night. Anonymous, undecorated, completely essential. Every empire in history that collapsed first in its logistics, long before it collapsed on its battlefields. The supply chain failed before the army did. The communication network fractured before the frontier did. Rome's greatest lesson was never about military supremacy. It was about the ruthless, obsessive, unglamorous work of keeping complex systems operational under impossible pressure. So the next time you track a package moving across a continent in real time, or watch a military convoy navigate a pre-mapped corridor with mechanical precision, remember where that thinking was born. On a Roman road. Inside a Mancio at midnight, in the hands of a courier who never made it into any history book, carrying a message that kept an empire alive for one more day. That is the story of Rome that no textbook ever told you, and now you know it.